One of philosophy's strengths also turns out to be one of its weaknesses, that is, terminology. It is the nature of philosophy to dig at the foundations of meaning and knowledge. For this reason, we often end up with additional terminology in order to help us to articulate our ideas more clearly, thereby avoiding unnecessary ambiguity. However, more terminology means more work on our parts, because sometimes two different words might target the same meaning, but from different angles. For example, we might separate our character-based ethical theories from action-based theories. But then we might choose to distinguish between theories that hold an action to be right or wrong in and of itself. For example, you should never do X. Separate these from those theories that conclude that any action X is always right so long as it results in Y, and always wrong so long as it results in Z. We can call the former type of theory, that an action is right or wrong in and of itself, a principlist theory, because it's based on principle concerning the nature of the act. And the latter we can call consequentialist, because it's based on the consequence that follows from the act. In this case, egoism, altruism, and utilitarianism, names that we will learn, are all consequentialist theories, and yet no two of them are quite the same. So sometimes our language can be difficult because we can have one term like consequentialism that can represent very different views, like egoism, utilitarianism. Another difficulty concerning philosophical language involves single terms that can imply different things when trading on subtleties. Teleology, for example, is a term that you will learn well, and a term that is pregnant with meaning and implication. Telos can mean end, purpose, or goal when literally translated. Tied to the issue of nature, a sense of designated end or goal implies purpose. In this case, telos is a question of inherent design. Design within nature implies a designer. So this might be pointing toward theism or belief in God. For a theist, then, a teleological theory of ethics will be built upon a question of created order. If God created human beings, then they are valuable persons, even if only a tiny fetus, for example. However, when most people use the phrase teleological ethics, they are not implying creation necessarily. They are most likely referring to ends-oriented theories, like consequentialist. So in this case, teleological ethics, that phrase may become synonymous with consequentialist ethical theories. And so we have to be careful with our articulations in philosophy, and while this is a great strength to philosophical study to be able to widen our vocabulary and use it in specific ways, it is also understandable that you might find yourself struggling at first with some of this basic terminology that we're going to use throughout the course. So the point of this video is to help you break down that terminology so far as it relates to the three branches of moral philosophy and the four primary theories of action upon which we will be focusing our attention. The discipline of moral philosophy, also known as ethics, is often broken into three related though distinct paradigms or approaches: meta-ethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. It also touches into political theory as well. Meta-ethics, meta meaning from above, refers to that aspect of moral philosophy that either digs at the roots of worldview presuppositions or philosophizes about the very language of moral philosophy itself in order to question the very meaning of goodness, the nature of morality, and the structure of ethics as an object of inquiry. What do you mean by good? Might be a meta-ethical question. Or, is there such a thing as objective universal moral truth? What best explains reality? Is there anything beyond the material world? Is a creator part of the equation? What is the human condition? Are we good? Or are we basically bad? Are we born good and go bad? Are we born bad and get better? What is the nature of the human condition and humanity? Your answer to questions like these form your worldview, the presuppositional lenses through which you will see your world. Your worldview will therefore necessarily inform your theories of action. How should I live? Ought we be moral? Ought I be moral? Why? What makes something right or wrong? Well, that will depend on what the world is like. These are metaethical questions. Normative ethics is that branch of ethics that deals specifically with our theories of actions and justifications for holding such theories. There are four main theories upon which we will focus our attention: deontological ethics, a principle or duty-based theory. This involves the notion that you ought to always do the right thing according to some higher rule. Having deep intuition of basic absolute principles, I ought always to do the right thing regardless of the consequences because it is the right thing to do. It would be immoral to do otherwise. This theory is most famously associated with the philosopher Immanuel Kant of the 1700s. Egoism is a form of consequentialism, which holds that I ought always to do that action which is in my own best self-interest. This theory is most famously associated with Thomas Hobbes of the late 1500s and Ayn Rand of the 1900s. Utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism, which holds that I ought always do that action which results in the greatest good for the greatest number. This theory was first articulated by Jeremy Bentham of the 1700s and then later strengthened by John Stuart Mill in the 1800s. Virtue ethics is a character-based theory which holds that I ought always act not according to some basic rule or absolute principle, and not according to the results that will immediately follow from my actions. Instead, I ought always act so as to become a certain sort of person, for a virtuous person will naturally perform virtuous actions. Note here the subtle shift in teleological implication noted earlier. Just as an acorn is pre-purposed to become a tree, so too we are meant to grow into a certain sort of person, one with a habitual virtuous character. This theory was widely held in the ancient world, but it was most famously articulated by Aristotle in the 4th century BC. Applied ethics involves a closer inspection of specific situations or complex issues that may arise. This may involve situational dilemmas, like whether you should steal to feed your family, or broader controversial political issues such as whether capital punishment is morally permissible or immoral, or even morally obligatory. Is war ever justified? Is it okay to kill one person if it saves two? The horns of such dilemmas represent well the complexities of applied ethics. In short, applied ethics asks, how will I live today, right now, in this situation? How will I act right now in this moment? While each of these subdisciplines of moral philosophy may be approached independently, they are nevertheless intricately intertwined. Your worldview informs your theory of action, which necessarily influences how you'll act when facing a situational dilemma. The philosophy of politics teeters between normative theory and applied ethics, as we legislate according to what we believe to be the right way to live, and all legislation by nature is applied discrimination in favor of one view or way of life and in opposition to another. In this course, we will look at aspects of each of these paradigms. In metaethics, we will focus on the issue of moral truth as objective or subjective. In politics, we will ponder our social contracts, and your term paper will focus on the question of normative ethics. we will look at the applied situations in every paradigm.